Good morning and welcome to NC Tech's Focus on Talent webinar. I'm Andrea Fleming, Director of Talent and Workforce Development for NC Tech. Really happy to have all of you join us today. A little bit about the NC Tech Association. We're a not-for-profit membership-driven trade association and the primary voice of the tech industry across North Carolina. NC Tech's mission is to foster growth and champion innovation in North Carolina's tech sector while providing a voice for the tech community. Our membership includes over 650 member companies, organizations, and institutions employing over 300,000 workers in North Carolina. Our work covers four major areas: professional networks, government affairs, sector promotion, and talent development. The talent and workforce are frequent topics in all four of those areas, as talent is critical to the success of an organization. Changes in the labor force and future talent pipelines are a big focus for the U.S., but especially for tech companies, excuse me, as they have specific skills needed for the industry. And those tech skills are rapidly changing and evolving. So we host these talent and workforce development focused webinars throughout the year. So watch for announcements and promotions in our newsletters and on social media. Some of the topics will cover education, maybe the role of the community college system, training and development, a lot around women in tech, and recruitment and retention. If you have suggestions or requests for topics or companies to be featured, please reach out to me. I'll share my email in the chat in just a few minutes. If you have questions during the session, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. So on to today's session. It's hosted by the Diversity Movement. NC Tech is proud to have the Diversity Movement as our DEI partner in offering training, educational materials, and consulting services with our members. Today we have with us Jamie Osterhout, Certified Diversity Executive and Chief Experience Officer at the Diversity Movement. Based in Raleigh, Diversity Movement enables organizations to build and strengthen culture by tying real-world business outcomes to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives via a scalable, subscription-based employee experience platform. Jamie creates employee-first, inclusive workplaces for both clients and the Diversity Movement's internal employees. So her why DEI? Why does she do this? She shared this through her bio. She grew up watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. She grew up learning that everyone is special and should be loved for who they are and treated with respect. As adults, these important lessons we learned in childhood can be forgotten. Diversity, equity, and inclusion matters to her because the diversity movement engages with people in their place of work. They're hopefully changing their perspectives and behavior. And then these people can share their new perspectives and behaviors with their families, their friends, and their communities. She has hopes to achieve the world that Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood taught her about as a child. I love that. Jamie has a lot to cover, so now I'll turn the Zoom mic over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm so excited and happy to be here. We're honored to be partners with NC Tech, so thank you so much again for having us. I know you all had an amazing D&I summit last month, and so really today's conversation is about continuing that momentum. As Andrea said, I think especially today in our state of North Carolina, many of you may have read the news about UNC and their board of governance passed through, which will then be approved next month by their board or will be up for approval to really eliminate DEI positions within the university system. Interestingly, as I was reading more about it, they're not eliminating reporting about diversity, just the positions. So I'll be very interested to follow along and see how these things change. But I think today's conversation in light of this is more important than ever. We are getting so much media and news all around us constantly. And especially for those of us who do believe in DEI and who do know the value of it, and more importantly, the business value of it for our technology companies here in the Triangle, it can be hard to navigate some of that noise. So my goal today is to really give you all some talking points, some ideas and ways of thinking that maybe you hadn't thought about before to really help you bring DEI to your organizations and to continue to help this tech sector thrive in the state of North Carolina. So that is my goal today. As Andrea said, please put your questions in the chat. I will save some time at the end to address those. We'll share my contact information with you. You're always welcome to reach out to me as well. And if you do, want to put in the chat, if you're able to share, anyone else grew up watching Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street like me? Would love to hear anyone else who's been doing that as I pull my slides up this morning. All right. And we can certainly make these slides available as well. So I know this is being recorded, and we can certainly share these out as well, because there are some good stats and talking points. So as I dive into the future of DEI in 2024, I think it's really important to first talk about the business macro trends that we're seeing in 2024. So I'm going to go through a few of these and spend a little bit more time on some of them as we go throughout the conversation today. But as we all know, our organizations, our businesses are still adapting to changing working environments that were brought about by COVID. I think especially in the tech sector, I was reading some articles recently, there was lots of hiring, lots of boom in tech because people had to shift their work in 2020 so dramatically and really rely on technology. Now we know that's contributing to what we have over here a little bit on the far right, where there have been some layoffs in the tech sector, even amidst kind of economic growth. Last year, I remember at this time, we all thought we were headed into a recession. That's what some of the economists were saying. That didn't quite happen, but we certainly have inflation. We have cost of living increasing, especially dramatically here where we are in Raleigh and in the Triangle area. And so, these are certainly macro trends that are affecting the space, not just in North Carolina, but also in our country and in our world. I will say there is, and there has been over the past few years, especially with COVID, an increased awareness around employee mental health, around employee well-being. What we're going to talk about today is really around that employee engagement, which encompasses all of these, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is such a critical part of employee engagement and of employee well-being. And so we've heard, and at the diversity movement, we're lucky enough to work with hundreds of different customers. We've heard from some CEOs that employee well-being, that employee engagement is their number one priority, because they know if they take care of their employees, their customers will be taken care of. And so that is really critical. It's critical to your bottom line to ensure that you are making that best foot forward in terms of earning revenue and things like that. So those are a couple of those top line macro trends. Down here, we have continued political shifts. Certainly here in the state of North Carolina, we have a big election coming up for governor. And throughout the country, certainly our presidential election, but it's actually a year of elections. So NPR called 2024 a mega election year. There are, I believe, close to 200 elections going on throughout the world this year. And so with that, while we always were told back in the day, you don't talk about politics at work, we know that these decisions and these political changes are impacting our employees. Things that are happening are still impacting us. We are people at the end of the day, and you can't just turn off who you are as a person. So while there are ways to respectfully talk about these things, we can't be naive and think that the political shifts aren't impacting our employees and their productivity. You all know today on the call that technology is continuing to develop, especially with AI. So many people, are worried about AI. I know there was my colleague Kurt did a great talk at the D&I Summit last month on DEI and AI. What we think about is we want to ensure that those who are creating AI are aware of the natural biases that may come into play, and so that we're being really smart and intentional when we use AI. And then lastly, our workplace demographics continue to evolve. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time, and I have another slide on this, but we technically have 5 generations in the workforce today. And that is really continuing to change quite rapidly, especially with Gen Z. So Gen Z, they are the folks that were born in the years 1997 to 2013. They grew up in the information age. They experienced economic insecurity during the Great Recession. They have many school shootings. So, back with other generations, folks remember maybe hiding under their desks for bomb drills. Now students are, school shootings and drills have become part of their everyday, part of this Generation Z. They're the most ethnically diverse generation, and also the generation that identifies more than any others as members of the LGBTQ plus community. So again, with this changing, when we think about this, we want to ensure that we are creating environments that are welcoming to Gen Z. In terms of the workforce, they are the newest members, but they're actually going to comprise 25% of the workforce in 2025. They do, and more than any other generation, millennials, I think, kind of started the trend with they want to work for organizations that are really mission focused. Gen Z is the same, and they are focused on sustainability. They're very concerned about climate change. I was reading an article just yesterday about how they have the most mental health challenges, and part of it is because they're worried about the future state of the world, not just with climate change, but with violence, geopolitical shifts, all of those things. And so they really do believe in the importance of DEI, and they really do believe in the importance of those mission-focused organizations, those organizations that really care and live out their values. Again, they really do expect more from their workplace. So it's not just a place to clock in and clock out, but really are looking for that work-life integration, looking for those bosses who aren't just, top down, but are really those inclusive leaders. And we're going to talk a lot more about inclusive leadership as I go on throughout the morning. This stat really was amazing to me. Gen Z will change jobs 10 times or more between the ages of 18 and 34. And so again, as a leader, if you're tuning into this, you might say, well, it doesn't matter because they're not going to stay here anyway. They're just going to leave. But if you can harness that talent, if you can create a space where they want to stay, not only will they be more likely to stay, especially for longer, but they're going to tell their friends about it. They're going to say, this was a great place to work. Absolutely recommend it. I learned what I needed to, and then I've moved on. And also it encourages us as leaders to think about and ask, well, what does this new generation need? I also think it's important. I spent a lot of time on Gen Z today, but it's equally important to think about our baby boomer generation. So my dad is part of that generation. He's 75. He's still working. He's in consulting. He uses ChatGPT. I was shocked to find this out. I was like, Dad, I don't even use ChatGPT. He's like, oh, it's great. I used it for this email I sent out the other day. And so again, we all have our biases. I would have never thought that he would have been using ChatGPT. And I can learn so much from him, even though he's towards the end of his career, although he'll work forever. I just know him. But he has so much wisdom and knowledge to pass on. And I, as a younger generation, have a lot to learn, but he also has a lot to learn from me. And I've helped him think about DEI. So he sends me articles now about DEI, which he don't think would have done a few years ago. And so I say all of this and I share this personal story because it is important as business leaders to ensure that we're thinking about how are we passing down knowledge to the next generations, and how are we soliciting feedback from those younger generations to make the organization better. Some of those great ideas, they can come from anyone at any age, from any background. And so when we think about that, that's why it's so important to consider this macro trend of these changing demographics. So with that, I mentioned employee engagement, and that's a top concern for many CEOs at organizations. And for us at the diversity movement, we've done a lot of research in this space and really believe that it's that employee engagement that's going to provide the ingredients for a thriving organization. So just some stats to share here with you all. We loved some great stats at the diversity movement. And when we looked at some of this and did some research, highly engaged employees generate 18% more sales and are 14% more productive. So if you think about that, that's 1 month of additional work. So when you have those highly engaged employees, they're the ones that are coming up with the great ideas. They're the ones that are sharing and saying, hey, I know we've always done it this way, but have we thought about doing it differently? But we as leaders have to create that space where they feel safe to share, where they can be productive. Employees who feel, again, that their voice is heard are over 4.5 times more likely to feel empowered to perform their best work. Absenteeism is reduced by 41%. And companies with these organizations that have that high trust can really rebound from things like recessions, like our pandemic, the fastest. So employee engagement clearly is key. It will impact your bottom line. And yet with that, so many organizations are struggling to do this well. So this comes from Workplace Options, which is an organization that actually acquired the diversity movement recently, back in November. We're so lucky to be a part of them. They are the global leader in employee engagement and employee wellness. And with that, they do a lot of research as well. And so we pulled some information that they had put together, as well as from Gallup. And what that data says is that even though employee engagement is important, only 32% of employees, when they were polled, said that they were engaged at work in the United States. And it actually goes down to 23% when you look at a global audience. And 70% of managers have no formal training in how to lead a team, specifically a hybrid team. And that when we talked to employees about their workplace stress, work-life balance was number one, but also that conflict and tension at work with their managers. That was about 25%. So again, that manager, that direct line supervisor has an amazing impact on employee engagement. And so we need to think about, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion, how we can train those leaders, those up and coming leaders, those supervisors, to create these environments where employees feel empowered, where they feel that they can do their best work, where they can be engaged. So we've really developed this growth model. And again, as I've been talking about, employee engagement is really that overall organization objective that CEOs are looking for, because they know it's going to lead to better ideas, it's going to lead to better innovation, better productivity, better collaboration, and retention of those employees. And so how do we get there? How do we get to this employee engagement? How do we get to these great team outcomes? We get there by thinking about the individual employee. What are they looking for? They want well-being. They want that work-life integration. They want to feel belonging, and they want to have trust in their organization. Trust that the organization is going to do what's right. Trust that the organization is going to communicate transparently. And so the way that we get there are through these leadership strategies that you see here at the bottom. And I'm not going to, we only have a short time together this morning. So I'm, of course, really going to focus on DEI as one of those leadership strategies. And, from the title of the conversation this morning, really sharing those trends in DEI. So we'll spend quite a bit of time on that and touch a little bit briefly on inclusive leadership and then that professional and career development towards the end. But with DEI, one of the things that the diversity movement has thought about, and we have a white paper that we'll share with all of you as a follow-up to today's conversation. But in thinking about this and talking with my team about this, I said, you know what? DEI needs a PR strategy, because clearly we are all seeing things, as I said at the beginning, in the news all around us that are saying DEI is bad, DEI is horrible. Why are we talking about this? So I have a communications background and marketing background. So I'm advocating today, and I want you all to advocate for a better communication strategy. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about all of these, but the first is to define or redefine DEI. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying that we're changing what DEI means. What I'm saying is that too many people have this perception. They literally will hear the letters DEI and recoil. I'll share a story. I was at a conference this past fall, and I was talking about the benefits of inclusion. And anytime anyone asked me, well, what's your speaking about today? I would say it's about the benefits of inclusion. I had people roll their eyes at me. I had people say that's a conversation killer just because I said inclusion and I said the words DEI. And so when we talk with folks, usually we can find this common ground and they say, oh, I guess I'm not against DEI. I'm just against the way that people explained it to me. So I'm going to share some core definitions and some ways that you all can hopefully start to explain DEI and really combat some of that misinformation that people have. So again, when we're thinking about this from a communications lens, we need to be able to communicate what is it and what can it help you and your organization do. And that's really where connecting DEI to employee engagement, to employee well-being, and the business strategy can really help. And again, I'm going to share a few slides with some great stats on these topics. Finding that common ground. Again, that's so important. Our world today is so noisy and it's so divisive. And so how can we, thinking back to my good friend, Mr. Rogers, meet someone where they are and try to find some common ground? And one of the ways that I've personally found success with that is telling personal stories. So certain things about diversity, equity, and inclusion may not resonate with everyone, but if you can find what's important to them, if you can find what resonates with them, you can make an impact. The other thing that I think is really critical, and this is something we're working on with the diversity movement as well, is sharing those success stories. As the Chief Experience Officer of the Diversity Movement, I get to see firsthand our amazing clients and the work they're doing to push DEI forward. And I constantly am telling them, you need to share the story internally and then start sharing it externally, because the work that these folks are doing is awesome. I'm sure the work that many of you on the line today are doing at your organizations is fantastic. So I encourage you all, share those stories. Start to combat some of this noise, some of this misinformation with your own successes. And then lastly, we really want to embrace that ongoing learning. So again, you all are here today, here to learn, and you want to be able to bring that to your organization. And with DEI in particular, it can't be a one and done. It can't be something where you just do one time a year training and hope for the best. You have to start integrating these conversations into the everyday vernacular at your company. And so that ongoing learning is really critical. So again, I'm going to get into each of these in a little bit more detail as we go through here. So first, really just to level set for everyone. And many of you, I'm sure, know all of these terms, but I always find it helpful to level set. I was an English and history major, so words are very important to me. But again, I think because there's so much of this negative rhetoric, when people hear DEI, they don't want to talk about it. And so the way I like to explain it is starting with diversity. And that's really the ways that everyone is unique from one another. Again, going back to that Sesame Street, everyone is an individual. We're all have different backgrounds. We all have different religious beliefs. We all have different ways of learning. We all have different experiences, maybe disabilities, either visible or invisible. And certainly things like race and gender identity are very important. And that's what people see. We often think about that iceberg graphic. So back when we were in grade school, right, they always talked about the iceberg. You could really only see a tiny bit above the surface, but there's so much more underneath. So again, when you look at someone, you make these snap judgments. Oh, they're probably part of this generation. They're white, they're a woman, but there's so much more underneath that we don't see. And so when we think about that diversity is really what makes up people. And then equity is different than equality. And this is something that I always share because I was raised, well, you treat everyone the same, Jamie. You treat everyone equally. And it took me, quite honestly, longer than I'd like to admit, to realize that not everyone can be treated the same or given the same things because we are all different. So for instance, if you, or like me, I don't have great eyesight, so I wear contacts. Other people in my family, all my siblings, none of them, they all have 20/20 vision. But I wear contacts and that helps me. They don't need contacts, but I do. There's a great visual from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that we started using recently of 4 different individuals, and they're all given the same bicycle. But they're all different. One is a child, one is a person who uses a wheelchair. That same bicycle is not going to work for them. You have to give the child a kid-sized bicycle. And so when we think about things like equity, it's really just creating that fair treatment so that everyone can have the same positive outcome, but not everyone needs the same things. So equity is really around, if you think about your organization, what are those processes? What are those policies, those procedures? Again, English major, so I like that alliteration of the process. Diversity is the people. So then inclusion is the participation. So inclusion is that environment where people feel safe They feel like they can engage. They feel like they can be their authentic self. And a lot of times, and you heard me mention a few moments ago, what people are looking for is that belonging. Belonging is really in the middle of this. So all three of these need to work together to create that belonging. And so that's what the individual is looking for. So again, we have people, diversity, equity is process, inclusion is participation. They all need to work together. And really, at the end of the day, how can you say, well, I don't want to treat people and give them what they need to be successful at my organization? That's all DEI is talking about. We just want everyone to be able to be their most successful selves. And as an organization, it's going to benefit you. Again, you're going to get that high employee engagement. You're going to get that employee who's really productive. And you're going to get the best, most innovative ideas, the best collaboration. So again, when we talk with business leaders and we share, well, this is really what we mean when we talk about DEI, they say, oh, well, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. I guess I can get behind that. And then some of the ones that have been doing this work for years and years say, yeah, that's what I've been saying for years. That's why my company's successful. So that's a little bit about just DEI and level setting on our definitions. Now I want to share with you all some misinformation. Again, all that noise constantly. So here are some quotes that we hear. DEI is an HR issue. I don't need to worry about it. My HR team's got it. It's just a focus on quotas. DEI is just race and gender. Oh, that's a political issue. And again, we don't talk about politics at work. So here's some things to combat those different quotes that you may hear, those different sound bites you may see. So DEI is an HR issue. Really, it's that business imperative that all areas of the organization need to be engaged with. You may have some folks that lead efforts, and that's great within HR, but really it needs to be something from that CEO, that C-suite leadership, that top down, that everyone feels that they're engaged with within the organization. It's just a focus on quotas. No, we do not want to talk about quotas. What we want to talk about is creating this culture where all perspectives are valued and all perspectives are embraced. Now, when we think about hiring, we do want to think about, well, maybe we don't always hire from the same school, or maybe we don't always want to hire from the same program, almost extending that pool of folks that you've been looking at. That's what we encourage our clients to do. We encourage them to think about, well, what is your hiring process? Have you just been hiring people that are referred? There's nothing wrong with referrals. Referrals can be fantastic. But if that's all you're doing, you're going to get the same types of candidates. Whereas, have you thought about maybe looking at a different school? Have you thought about, for this position, do you really need a college degree? Maybe, maybe not. And so thinking about those things can really broaden that pool and broaden that those types of candidates that you're able to get. We hear all the time, well, I can't find good talent. And I hear this, I always laugh a little bit because people say this to me in every industry. I've heard it in accounting, I've heard it in marketing, I've heard it in the financial services, I've heard it even in technology. Well, you don't understand, my industry is different. It's like every industry says that. There is good talent out there, but sometimes it takes looking in some different places than we're used to looking. DEI is just race and gender. So I just said a few moments ago, those are important parts of diversity. Absolutely. But it's so much more than that. Again, when we think about multi-generational diversity, that's incredibly important, especially in organizations. And then lastly, it's just a political issue. Again, it's not about politics. It's really about making your business more successful and making sure that you're both attracting and retaining the very best talent. So those are, hopefully just some talking points, if you all have heard these, that you all can use and share. So again, here's some more stats. You can see the various sources that are listed here. So I'm not going to go through all of these. But again, we talked a little bit about productivity earlier when we have strong employee engagement. This one, when you have happy workers, employees that feel included, employees that feel engaged, they're 13% more productive. And when I first read that, I said, okay, but when you do the math, that is an additional hour, additional full workday each week. And so when you think about that, that really adds up over time. And so again, that shows the value. The other thing that I always like to think about, especially in a business perspective, is again, if you're a leader of an organization, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make money, trying to save money, and you're trying to reduce your risk. And so with the study with Deloitte, and they looked at this, diversity increases innovation by 20%, decision-making quality by 20%, and reduces risk by 30%. So again, when we think about these things and why this is important, here are some good business numbers that, again, you can use in talking with folks. The other thing, and Andrea touched on this very briefly at the beginning, but that employee retention is so important. And so when we think about employee retention, it can actually cost half of the employee salary to double the employee salary to replace someone. So again, you see some of that math here below for an employee who has an annual salary of $75,000, but that really can add up if you have turnover, and 13% of resignations are partly due to that dissatisfaction with the company's DEI efforts. That number is going to go up because, like I said at the very beginning, Gen Z is coming to the workforce. If they do not see that authentic commitment to these things, they will not stay. And so, again, this is very important when we think about growing our companies, when we think about not just finding talent, but keeping talent, and how that can really impact your bottom line. And then I always like to use this slide as well. So we've talked a lot about, and this is the focus on talent. So I've talked a lot about employees, but I do want to take a moment to talk about your customers. So those folks that are buying the technology from your organization. Again, this is more B2C, so direct to consumers and stats, but it's still really, really important to think about. And this one in particular, so for members of the LGBTQ plus community, $3.6 trillion in buying power globally. And I believe this number is now actually higher. And it's the fastest growing market segment in the US. So again, if you're thinking about marketing products and you're not being inclusive in your marketing and people do not feel that they're seen in your efforts, then they will not purchase from you. And again, I'm seeing this more and more with millennials and with Gen Z. If they see an organization, they will just not purchase from them if they don't align with their values. Same thing with people with disabilities. So actually 25% of Americans have a disability, but they also have disposable incomes. And so again, for you all, especially in the tech space, are your technologies accessible? Can they be used by people who are blind, for instance, who use a screen reader? This is something that's really important to think about when you all are thinking about the technology you're developing and when you're thinking about, again, that marketing. So didn't want to spend too much time on this because I know we're focused on talent, but I do think it's important to think about our consumer as well, our final customer. So I mentioned that one of the communication strategies in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion is finding common ground. And I will be the first to admit that this is not always easy. And my team knows, and I'll chat about this and I'll say, I can talk to clients all day, but sometimes when we're in those personal situations, those family situations, it can be hard. So I find myself even struggling sometimes as well. And so these are actually some things that I have personally used and found to be helpful. So we wanted to share some of those with you all this morning as well. And so one in particular that it's my favorite is just using the word curious and saying, I'm curious, what makes you say that? So if someone says something and it's a little off, you can say, you know what, I'm curious, what makes you say that? Another thing that is helpful is saying, are you open to a different perspective? I'm curious. Are you open to a different perspective? Can I explain to you that, I attended the session, with NC Tech, and this person really explained diversity to me in a different way. Can I share it with you? And so that's something that I've also found to be helpful. Here's another one. What do you mean by that? Can you explain that a little bit more? Another thing that I find to be helpful, and Melanie Sanders on my team says this a lot when we lead trainings, I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm trying to open your mind. And so again, we're not trying to win this argument, and we're really focused more on building those bridges, right? Not the barriers. Now, eventually down the line, yes, maybe we do want to get someone to see our side, to see our opinion, to have them change their mind. But in some of these initial conversations, just saying, I'm not trying to change your mind, I'm trying to open it. Did you know that this diversity, equity, and inclusion, there have been all these studies that it really does improve employee engagement in your bottom line? Again, those are some things that you all can take and use as tools. Another great idea, and this was something that I struggle with personally, but instead of saying but, saying and. So Susie Silver on my team says it's not a but, it's an and, it's an expansion. And so these are really important, just language tips for you all to think about that certainly we found helpful. Sometimes it's easier than others, but wanted to share these, especially as a leader. When you're talking with your teams, these can be some great just scripts that you all can use and put into place. So we talked a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and my belief that we need better communication strategy around it. So I've shared some of those tips. What I want to share with you all now, and as we wrap up some of our time, because I do want to make sure that we get to some questions at the end, are just a couple more slides. So one is on inclusive leadership. So again, especially with Gen Z coming into the workplace, they are looking for those inclusive leaders. It is not this command and control top-down leadership anymore. That just will not work. Some might say it never worked that well, but really what we want to think about is being an inclusive leader. So at the diversity movement, we've created these 7 competencies. We actually have a really cool tool that you can do an assessment and see where you're strong and where you maybe have areas for improvement. So I'm going to talk through each of these briefly, and I'll share my strengths and my areas for growth as well. And then I want you all to kind of think about maybe your strengths and your areas of growth as I'm talking through this. So communication, we've spent a lot of time talking about communication already. And it's funny, I used to think I'm a pretty good communicator. I was an English major, I can write. And what I realized about myself in an area where I can still improve is that active listening. So an important part of communication isn't just speaking, it's that listening. So that's something that when we think about being an inclusive leader, we want to make sure that we're embracing. Collaboration, that's the second competency down. So really with that, again, I think I'm a pretty good collaborator, but sometimes with collaboration, it's not always saying, oh yeah, I'll help you with that, teammate. I'll help you with that, CEO. It's also knowing when to say, this isn't a good idea. Is this really going to impact our bottom line? Is this really going to make our employee engagement stronger? So that collaboration, isn't always about saying yes and being the one to take up work, but also to know when to push back and say no. When we think about capability, a lot of people, it's interesting with this, with capability, because of course that just means, are you good at your job? Are you able to get your tasks done? But a big part of capability is also knowing when to delegate. So are you looking at people on your team and looking at how they can grow and improve? Or are you one of those people that just takes it on yourself? Oh, I can do this better, faster. So that's a really important part about capability. Another part is that communications. Are you communicating what you're doing? You may be working really hard and super capable, but you're not sharing that with your team, so they have no idea what you're doing. Cultural intelligence. This is where we are learning, going back to that constant learning, and really understanding, again, where people are coming from. What are those religious backgrounds? What are those holidays that are important to those on your team that maybe aren't familiar to you? For me, I grew up Catholic, so I understand the Christian holidays very well. I had very good friends growing up that were Jewish. I understand those holidays pretty well. It wasn't until later in life that I became friends with those who were Muslim. And so with Ramadan, that was recently celebrated, I didn't really understand that. And so I've worked hard to learn more about that culture so that I can be more culturally intelligent. Reliability. So this one is my strength. If I tell you I'm going to do something, I will do it. If I reach up against some, issue, I'm going to let you know about it, and I'm going to communicate what's going on, why, but I'm going to get things done. The kind of flip side of this is burnout. So if you are reliable, sometimes you're not great at delegating and doing things. And so for me, that's something that I have been thinking about and working on. Self-awareness, that's one of really being aware of your biases. Are you hiring people on your team just because they went to the same school as you? They're from the same state that you grew up in. And so that self-awareness is very important. How are you coming off in your communications? Did it land right? Are you asking those questions of your team? And then lastly is growth mindset. So this is where you are looking ahead to the future and you are working to build that future, maybe if it's not already in place. So this one for me is my area that I need to really focus on because I'm one of those people, since I am reliable, I like everything to be put together and everything, the plan to be in place before I take that leap. And so I've learned, especially in working with my CEO, where this is his strength, and another colleague of mine, Kurt Merriweather, who spoke at the summit last month, that is their strength. So I can rely on them a little bit more. And as a team, we work very well together because I can maybe question some things or in that collaboration push back on some things where they're already moving forward. So it's really helpful to know yourself, what your strengths and area for opportunity are, but also your team so that you can be that high performing team that will lead to that strong employee engagement. So if folks are willing to put in the chat, kind of where do you think your strength is? I shared mine as reliability. My area for opportunity or growth is that growth mindset. If anyone else wants to share, I'd love for you all to put that in the chat as well, or just reflect on it and think about it throughout your day today. Great. I see a couple of folks sharing in the chat. The last thing that I want to share with you all when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it really does impact the entire employee life cycle, and especially professional and career development. And so we have worked with, again, hundreds of clients, and we have done many surveys across our client base. And almost every time we work with clients, these are the lowest scoring questions. So only 56% agree that compensation is fair, and only 50% agree that promotion decisions are fair. So again, whether that's true or not, it does go back to that communications. Are you communicating how promotion decisions are made? Do you have an equitable process in place? Start there. But a lot of times, honestly, when we work with clients, they do have good processes in place. They've just maybe never communicated them. And so same thing with compensation. People may feel that things are unfair, and compensation, quite honestly, this is one that no matter what, I think is always going to be lower, especially right now, as we talked about the changing economy, inflation. Of course, people they're just having a difficult time right now. But do you do annual reviews? When is the compensation decision made? How is it made? And so some of that communication is really important. So I encourage everyone to think about that career development, that inclusion, in order to ensure that folks do feel, okay, this is a company that, again, I can trust, that I do want to bring my best self to. So with that, I know we just have I think we have about 5 minutes left. I think I almost timed this perfectly. So I'm going to stop sharing, ask a couple of questions, and I do have a great resource page that I will share with you all as we wrap up as well. And I see a couple of folks shared in the chat. Thank you, Nicole, for sharing your areas for focus and improvement of collaboration and communication. That's fantastic.
Jamie, that was great. And so much of it seems so balanced between the people and the business. The people, it's the right thing to do, and there are so many benefits. But for the business, everything impacts the bottom line. Your bottom line business will be better to have your people, your employees, your customers feel included. That's so important. Of course, I have to bring up another TV reference. This brings to mind for me a Walt Whitman quote made famous by Ted Lasso about be curious, not judgmental, and how important. And that's one of the things that I try really hard. With your list of things that you were working on personally, that's one of the things that I work on personally is always try to be curious, see things from the other side, try to understand where someone else may be coming from.
That's great, Andrea. Thanks so much for sharing. I love that quote too.
Love some Ted Lasso too.
Who doesn't?
Lots of lessons there also.
Right.
So I did put in the chat, if you do have a question that may be a little more lengthy, please feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. I will be following up with all of the attendees with a recording and with the slides, and then some additional contact information for Jamie, and also a resource page of information that you can share either personally or with your organization about some of the things that the diversity movement offers to companies.
Yeah.
So we do have one question in the chat, Jamie.
Yeah, I see that. Great question. So, and again, I think we're all feeling this maybe more acutely here in the state of North Carolina today, just with some of the news that came out from UNC. And we're seeing this as a trend throughout the country. And that the question is, now that the Supreme Court has decided against DEI in universities, and the universities are discontinuing DEI initiatives, what can be done? So first of all, I would say to that, that it's not all universities. So think about, and yes, UNC does have a broad reach in the state of North Carolina, which I completely recognize, but there are lots of private universities that even last night I was reading something about Duke and its founding and some of the work that they are doing around racial equity in that space. There's lots of amazing here in the state, historically Black colleges and universities. They are not discontinuing DEI. The other thing that I would say is, when we start to see backlash like this, it's because what we're doing is working. And people are saying, well, I don't want to stand for this. And again, I would encourage folks to really find that common ground. It's hard, to battle that system. But when you're talking with other business leaders, we're not in the university system with the businesses. We're outside of that. We're in the business community. So I encourage you to talk to business leaders about that. And to focus on that. It can be discouraging. I know it certainly is for me to read, especially, we need that great talent here in the state of North Carolina. But I would encourage you to focus where you can make change. And, one thing we think a lot about at the diversity movement is there's the spectrum, right? There's those that are just never going to change. We can't really waste our time with some of those folks. But there's so many people that are in that middle that are just hearing this noise. And if you can reach those folks, those are who we're going to be able to move forward and again, have that impact on our business community here in North Carolina.
Yes, we all have to remember the bell curve. Most people are in the middle somewhere. There are the extremes on either end, and often those are the loudest ones. But yeah, reaching people in the middle is important.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? So Jamie, I really want to thank you and the diversity movement for hosting the session today. All of this was fantastic. Again, I'll follow up with everyone with, I think you said the slides can be made available.
Yes,
There
absolutely.
were definitely some that I grabbed some screen captures of things that I want to remember, but also things to share out to a larger group. So we'll make the slides available, the link to the recording in case you want to forward it and share it with anyone else on your team. And then the resource page for the diversity movement. So Jamie, thank you for your time today. Do you have any last comments you'd like to leave people with?
I'm really just so appreciative of everyone for tuning in today. Please stay encouraged. Please reach out to me if I can be helpful. I'm always happy to have a quick conversation or virtual cup of coffee. And so is anyone on my team. So thank you to NC Tech. Thank you, Andrea. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. We're glad to have in diversity movement just right around the corner and here local. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you. Have a great day.